Like Abe, I'm tempted to say that the question, what does diaspora Jewry expect from Israel, is the wrong question. From a certain point of view, it doesn't really matter. I think we in the diaspora have the right to give our opinions about Israeli policy, but I don't think we have the right to expect that Israeli leaders should make their decisions about Israeli policy based on what is good for us. So to take a hypothetical situation, let's say Israel were to attack Iran. You can imagine a situation in which Iran retaliated against US troops in Afghanistan, oil prices spiked, the US went into recession, and it led to an increase in anti-Semitism in the United States. So perhaps it wouldn't be so good for the Jews in America. But I don't think we would have the right to say to Israeli leaders that therefore Israeli leaders should put our interests ahead of what they perceive to be the interests of the state of Israel. I happen to think that an Israeli attack on Israel would probably not be such a good idea, but I think we have to make our argument based on what's good for the state of Israel, not expect Israeli leaders to put the interests of diaspora Jewry ahead of what they perceive to be the interests of the state of Israel. So let me answer the question that I wish had been asked, which is, what does American Jewry think of Israel, since I don't feel qualified to speak about opinions of diaspora Jewry outside the United States. And what I would say is that we are witnessing in the United States the slow decline of the Zionist consensus. I don't say that with any pleasure. I think of it as a tragedy. I am a Zionist. I believe very strongly in Israel's existence as a democratic Jewish state. But I think the Zionist consensus that was born in the United States in the 1930s and 40s and then solidified after 1967 is eroding, especially amongst younger American Jews. And it's eroding for two reasons. And Abe referred to the first one, and I talk about it at some length in my book. The first is indifference to Judaism itself. Israel is a Jewish thing. It's not realistic to expect that American Jews, especially young American Jews, who feel very little commitment to and connection to anything Jewish, will feel strongly connected to a Jewish state. Amongst older American Jews, it's more common to find people who have very little connection to Judaism, but who have a very strong sense of secular tribalism. In fact, I think you could say that for at least a certain period of time, the American Jewish communal establishment was led by these secular tribalists. But it turns out that secular tribalism doesn't transmit very well from generation to generation in a highly embracing society like the United States. And this has implications for Israel. So for instance, in the 2007 study by Stephen Cohen and Ari Kelman, they found that when they asked American Jews, would Israel's destruction be a personal tragedy for you? 80% of American Jews over the age of 65 said yes, but among American Jews under the age of 35, only 50% said yes. So only 50% said that Israel's destruction would be a personal tragedy for them. But why should we expect any different when 50% of young American Jews don't consider it a personal tragedy to see the destruction of Judaism even in their own family via intermarriage and the lack of the raising of Jewish children? This mounting indifference has implications for diaspora Israeli relations, but it's not the product of anything Israel is doing. It's the product of our failure. The failure of the American Jewish community to develop a strong Jewish school system, to instill knowledge of, joy in, and fascination with Judaism. But there is also another phenomenon, another force that I think is eroding the Zionist consensus that has existed amongst American Jews since the 30s and 40s, and certainly since 1967. And this is more of an elite phenomenon, but still, I think, a very significant phenomenon. And it has to do with the relationship between the emerging non-Orthodox religious and intellectual leadership amongst young American Jews and the state of Israel. I'm thinking about Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist rabbinical students, the independent Minyan movement, which is a very significant religious renewal force amongst younger American Jews, younger American Jewish journalists, and academics. And this is a phenomenon that has been noted by people to my political right, like Daniel Gordis and Jack Wertheimer as well. They've also written about this phenomenon. It's not that these people are anti-Zionists, but they don't have the depth of Zionist commitment that their elders did for this reason. The American Jewish community the Zionist consensus emerged because of the Holocaust. The American Jewish community had wide-ranging, very disparate views about Zionism until the 1930s and 40s. What ended the discussion in the United States was the irrefutable evidence that Jews were being destroyed and that America was not their refuge because we would not let them in. That's what made the case for the Jewish state. I want to be clear, I'm not arguing that it is the Holocaust that justifies Israel's existence. I'm arguing that it is the Holocaust that created the Zionist consensus in the United States. Zionism as refuge. People have very strong opinions about Israel's character, its political character, but the political character was not what made them Zionists. What made them Zionists was the idea of refuge. I would say that my generation is the last generation that identifies with this Zionism as refuge because we grew up, those of us who grew up in the 1980s, with the Soviet Jewry movement and also the Ethiopian Exodus. So it was the same story. Jews persecuted in anti-Semitic regimes going to Israel as refuge. If you believe, as I do, in Zionism as refuge, if it's part of your life experience, you can have very, very profound critiques of Israel's political character. But you don't question the existence of Israel as a Jewish state itself because your commitment to Israel as a Jewish state is not predicated on anything having to do with its politics. And I think Abe was making exactly that point. There is a brick wall that you hit, no matter how alienated you are. But I think for younger American Jews growing up post-Cold War, who certainly don't see Israel as a refuge themselves, and have never seen any large diaspora community living under anti-Semitic tyranny, needing Israel as a refuge. What strikes me when I talk to those younger people is their willingness to go when they are very profoundly alienated by Israel's policies, whether it has to do with its treatment of non-Orthodox Jews or its treatment of the Palestinians. More of a willingness to open up questions that have been essentially closed in the American Jewish community for many, many years about the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. I rarely speak to Jewish groups on campus without at least one Jewish student saying to me, wait a second, why do we need a Jewish state at all? And what strikes me is the almost casual way in which they raise that question, a question that would be unthinkable or at least lead to enormous fear and trembling for their elders. And I think the point is not that these people are committed anti-Zionists. They're not committed anti-Zionists. Most of them would probably say that they support a democratic Jewish state alongside a Palestinian state because it's the best way to end the conflict. But that pragmatic support for a two-state solution is different than an ideological commitment to a Jewish state, regardless of what happens with the Palestinians. And that's why I believe that if the two-state solution dies, if we witness the inability to create a Palestinian state, we move to a situation in which there is an emerging consensus that a Palestinian state, a viable, contiguous one in the West Bank, cannot be created. You will see more of a willingness amongst younger American Jewish elites to move towards a position in which they say, well, maybe the secular binational position is now the more realistic one. I supported the two-state solution on pragmatic grounds, but not on ideological grounds. And if it no longer seems to be practical and pragmatic, I will move towards some thinking about something else. Again, I say that not with any sense of gladness, with great sense of fear, because I myself believe in Israel as a democratic Jewish state. But I think that will be the consequence in American Jewry if the two-state solution dies. And I think it will be a very disturbing and worrying consequence as we see the Zionist consensus start to collapse amongst younger American Jews, and it will lead to a much more bitter divide in the American Jewish community. Right now we're basically yelling at each other between essentially more hawkish Zionists who support a two-state solution and more dovish Zionists who support a two-state solution. That will be peanuts compared to the arguments we'll be having when it's essentially an argument between people who embrace a one-state solution that is essentially non-democratic because it doesn't give Palestinians the vote, and those who embrace a secular binational state. So all of this will have very, very profound and I think troubling implications for American Jewry. But those implications will not be nearly as troubling as the implications for Israel itself if the two-state solution dies. And I think fundamentally that should be the even bigger concern. Thanks very much.